Welcome to the Fair Housing Insiders. We are so thankful that you joined us. And please remember to subscribe here on our YouTube channel or follow and like us on your favorite social media outlet, which you can find links to in our show notes for even more fair housing news and insights. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Fair Housing Insiders. This is a special episode. We felt that it was really important to get this out to our community as soon as possible. Today, we are focusing on some new HUD guidance that was recently released on April 29th, 2024, and was announced in a HUD press release on May 2nd, 2024. I'm your host, Jonathan Sarr, and today we are joined by Kathy Williams. So, Kathy, we look forward to your insights on this topic. So we turn the floor to you, Kathy. Can you give us an idea of what these notices, these guidances are?
Yeah, hey, Jonathan. Good to be with you today. HUD came out, as you were just saying, with these really two kind of separate notices, both which were done in response to President Biden's executive order to a number of federal agencies requiring that they study the concerns with artificial intelligence and its use and its continued increasing use throughout all forms or all areas of our business, of our social media, of our culture, and then of our government and the laws surrounding and implementing the requirements of the government. So HUD chose to do this by releasing two notices. It is the first of these that I have some pretty serious concerns that we get this information out to our Fair Housing Institute audience as soon as possible. The first is FHEO guidance on screening of applicants for rental housing. And that's what I'm going to talk about just very briefly today. And then I think we're going to need to produce another educational document that we can also get out that can get more into the details of that notice. The second notice is FHEO guidance on advertising through digital platforms. Now, that has some important information too, but I don't think it is as important, if you will, to our audience as much as the screening notice is. So I do want to talk about that today. And again, to put everybody on notice that there is information that they included in this notice about screening and AI, which has a much broader impact than just being concerned about how AI is being used in screening for applicants. So basically, these notices purport to tackle the misuse of AI algorithmic capabilities in two different contexts, both tenant selection and the second one is housing availability advertisements. HUD cites research that indicates that AI software can introduce bias and potential discrimination into these activities. I said purport because I found information in that screening notice that was much broader than anything just involving AI and maybe the use of AI, particularly by the screening companies that most housing providers use to help them decide whether an applicant should be accepted or rejected. And most of you are very familiar with that. And obviously, using a protected characteristic or even a proxy for a protected characteristics when you're screening or when you're advertising could be a fair housing violation. We all have to acknowledge that. And so the issue is, I don't want you to assume that this is such an obvious thing that therefore you don't need to pay attention to it, because you do need to pay attention to this. It is impossible, and these notices bring that out, that you can't somehow justify that you didn't know that the way you were screening or the way you were advertising might take into consideration a characteristic that is protected by the Fair Housing Act. A lot of you may think that's what these notices are about. They are about much more than that. Because remember, it always gets complicated when we talk about that there could be legal liability for acts involving screening or advertising that either intentionally discriminate or that have a disparate impact and thereby discriminate against one or more protected categories.
Okay, well, we've that's a lot to digest. Number one, and two, in the past, we have covered disparate impact on this show. So, what's so different about this notice?
So when they talk about disparate impact and how that could result from screening criteria, one thing they bring out is that only screening criteria and standards, including those with very complex models, which are a lot of times used by those screening companies, that are well tailored to predict future behavior relevant to tenancy, can be considered necessary to achieving a legitimate interest. In other words, even if you think it's obvious, or the screening company thinks it's obvious, that someone that has, let's say, a credit score that is very low. Now, the screening company may have decided that, well, that's obviously someone who's not going to pay their rent. If the screening company has not done research to find out if someone with a low credit score has a more likely chance than others to not pay their rent, that's not a valid justification for using a credit score. I found that rather surprising, which is why I think it's so important we get this information out there as soon as possible. In fact, the notice goes on to discuss 3 different methods that are almost always used when deciding whether to accept or reject an applicant. And those were the use of screening, those that use credit scores, those that use eviction records, and again, almost everybody does that. And then the third one was criminal history records. Now, I was not surprised by anything in the notice about criminal history. We have talked about that. In fact, HUD has talked about that a lot. What I was very surprised about was that HUD discusses how credit scores can have a disparate impact on deciding who gets to live in a property and who doesn't. Likewise, it discussed eviction history records and how that might have a disparate impact against minorities, against families with children, and against people with disabilities. Therefore, if the screening company and the housing provider does not have justification why someone who was evicted in the past is not going to pay their rent or be a good tenant today, they may find using that information in how you determine whether someone is accepted or rejected may be a violation of the Fair Housing Act. Now, that was a surprise to me, and we're going to have to think about that and do a lot more education about that, I think, in the near future.
Welcome back. These videos are powered by our friends at Digital. Their team harnesses the power of AI and automation to handle the heavy lifting for you and your leasing team, and they understand the complexities of fair housing compliance. Their platform, Fiona, streamlines the process, ensuring each property's digital footprint is not only effective, but also fully compliant. Check out their website to learn more.
Okay. So, yes, we will. I wholeheartedly agree. We need to have quite a few episodes on both of these notices. So for our audience, then, what's your general takeaway? How would you sum it up? And again, thank you for providing your feedback on both these notices.
I think what I'm seeing, just kind of in a general overview of that screening notice, is that HUD is trying to use the Fair Housing Act as a way to apply many of the requirements that have been there for a long time to federally funded housing. I think it's trying to use the Fair Housing Act to apply those kind of requirements to private market housing. And I think that will be a big surprise to our private market listeners. And let me give you an example. HUD has always had the requirement that if you were in federally funded housing and your application got rejected, you had a right to an appeal. And the housing provider had to listen to the reasons why you thought your application should have been accepted, and then reconsider and then make another decision of whether to uphold the rejection or not. That has never been a requirement for private market housing. How they rejected people and what they did after the rejection was kind of up to them. Mm-hmm. This notice about screening basically says that to make sure that you're being fair and are not rejecting people based on algorithms and other reasons, including your own criteria, that may not have a fully non-discriminatory response to those applications, then you ought to let everybody appeal, and you ought to have to give them all reasons, including all documents, upon which you based your rejection. Well, that has not been the practice in the housing industry. If they rejected someone, let's say for criminal history screening, they usually don't have those records. They count on their screening company to review those and advise them whether to accept or reject. They don't have those documents. But HUD is now saying, hey, to be fair, that applicant has the right to get all of that from you, housing provider, and a fully detailed description of why you got rejected. So if it were for a credit score, instead of just saying you were rejected for your credit score, which a lot of companies do, you have to say you were rejected for a credit score of 550 when the minimum we will accept is 625, for example. So a lot more detail, again, giving the applicant more information upon which they can base their appeal should they make one to you. There is a lot of information in that screening notice like that, with examples that I think will catch a lot of the private market housing providers by surprise, which is probably why we're going to need to jump back in here soon with more information.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much, Kathy. Yeah, for our community, please know that we are already working on future episodes to kind of digest and dissect both of these notices and go into a lot more detail on how it's going to affect the property management industry. So thank you again, Kathy. And as well, please note that the references to both of those notices are in the show notes. So take a look at that. If you're on YouTube, they'll be in the show notes there. If you're on the website, they'll be listed on that particular blog. So thank you again, Kathy, for taking the time to be with us today. Thank you to our community. Again, this has been a special episode that we have produced and are releasing as soon as possible. So thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you. Take care, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and we can't wait to hear your feedback about today's episode. Do you have a topic that you would like to see discussed in a future episode? Feel free to share that with us. In the show notes, you'll see a link to sign up for our newsletter. This newsletter will keep you up to date with our latest episodes, blogs, and information about our online fair housing courses. Thank you again, and happy training.